যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্জা দলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. We have back with us Deekhit for the third or fourth time today. First of all, thanks a lot Deekhit for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Deekhit is a lawyer, author, and among the many cool things he has achieved at this young age, one of them is coming up with the very cool idea of having 75 states, breaking up all the Indian states into 75 states so that all of their potentials can be realized individually. That's a very cool idea to begin with, and he has written 2 more books. I think he has written many books, 2 of whose topics we are going to merge today. Fixing science in India, as you all know, that's become very popular among our circles, and fixing and India's supply chains in a world at war. We are going to check out what are the overlaps in it. But first, I want to take offense at something Deekhit said right before starting the podcast, that this small sachet of poor man's Colombian brew that I'm drinking is allegedly of very high-class BBKs, which I absolutely refuse. I want to assure people that আমি এখনো খেটে খাওয়া মানুষের প্রতিনিধি, and this is absolutely non-BBK small sachets of coffee. So Deekhit, firstly tell us what problems do you see in Indian science education? What are the problems? What are the hidden problems we are experiencing without knowing in India's supply chains, and how do they overlap these 2 worlds?
Okay, so again, thanks for having me. And as far as coffees are concerned, I think you should heed to Modi ji and have more Swadeshi options.
Yes.
And you should favor the poor farmers of Karnataka,
Yes.
who are not actually poor, but well,
Yes.
we also have the
Farmer means poor. Farmer is default poor.
Farmer means poor. Middleman, big farmer, small farmer, everyone poor.
Yes.
So anyways, to come back to the topic, if we have a look at the whole system, this year's Nobel Prize in Economics, right? It went to Joel Mocker and 2 of his colleagues. The principal point that was made is that it is more or less technical innovation and R&D that is endogenous to an economic system that leads to long-term economic growth. To simplify it further, what it means is any country that wants to have an interest in growing long-term cannot do copy-paste and catch up all its life. It needs to invest heavily in R&D. It needs to find out its own ways of doing things, own means of doing things, own that IP and build on that IP. So if we take a look, for example, at one of the most painful aspects of because these days defense analysts in particular are quite popular, we have this tender to replace our AN-32 fleet. AN-32s are relatively small aircraft that do transport operations for the Air Force, but they're very critical because to move small amounts of men and material, you cannot always have one giant tanker all the time. So to replace our AN-32 fleet, we don't have any domestic options. Fine, but let's take a look at the 4 options that are expected to fill up the tender. 3 of them are using American engines. So the same problem that you will have with Tejas, you will have with them. And the 4th option, which is A400M, it is a consortium of European countries, which at any one point, if they choose to cause us any trouble in the provision of spares, we are done for. So now, why has, after 70 odd years, so much investment, so much thinking. We have such a large defense research complex. How has the situation come to this? And the root of it really begins that when you consider that long-term economic growth depends on innovation, depends on investments in technology and R&D. The question is, A, how much are we spending on that R&D? B, whatever we are spending, what are we getting for it? And there, in both of these aspects, India is not just lacking, it is criminally negligent. So, if I take a look at surface level analysis that is done, they say that, oh, India only spends what, 1.2% of its GDP on R&D. That is not enough. My question is, if I double it, triple it, quadruple it, will we start making great things? No, because our complex, the incentives in that complex, and the kind of vested interest in that complex, which we will talk more about through this podcast, they don't have any interest in scientific outcomes. Their interests are actually in what I call Peter Pan projects. And these Peter Pan projects are basically projects which can last over 20, 30 years without any reasonable outcome, so that their people can get funding from the ministries and the departments. Their people can get awards from departments and ministries. Their people can do foreign postdocs and go abroad. And they have a network of basically affiliated people below them, which they can use to dispense favors and take favors from. That is one. And I have quantified it. I have explained their genealogy. So, like, in the Puranas, we have genealogy. King so and so was son of King so and so, so and so, so and so, so and so, and they go back all the way to Brahma. Like that, we also have a genealogy of gatekeepers in this country, which constitute, the vested interests, and they're well explained as to how they emerge, which is also an interesting economic case. But because of this system, what ends up happening is the kind of scientific and technological innovation education you have in this country also gets skewed, because the intrinsic economic interest for someone who's today in an IIT or an NIT is not to do technology. It's to ultimately enter into finance, some way, form, shape, or other, or into consumer goods. Once you've blocked that entry, even the kind of education and priorities people have changes.
Can increasing salaries by like 2-3 times that change this scenario?
Again, if I take a look at the median salary a government scientist gets in this country, and I'm saying government because 75% of R&D expenditure is still in the government sector.
Yeah.
That median salary is close to 2.5-3x the average salary in the country.
Even for a guy who goes into finance and MBA.
See, finance and MBA is also one more big reason why, because if I take a look at your career progression path in these institutions, there is practically no way for you to move ahead unless you affiliate yourself with a certain gatekeeping group and you commit yourself to either a very difficult life where you're trying to innovate and nothing is in your favor. Your funds from DST won't come in time. Funds anyways are not coming today because the central government is so sick and tired of these people. Basically, only as much money as is necessary to pay salaries and pensions is being given. Project funding is in an absolute mess. If it is approved, it is not disbursed. If it is disbursed, it doesn't come on time. And secondly, your career progression depends on the posts you hold, the offices you hold, what kind of transfers you can get, and what kind of awards you get. People who are outside of the complex, they must understand. We had this Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award. Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award, before it was rechristened and reformulated, which was one of the good things that came out of this book. That old award also carried with it basically a long grant. It was free money. So what used to happen was, these gatekeepers used to sit together and they used to decide who to give the SSB award and who not to give the SSB award, not on the basis of any scientific research outcomes, but only on the basis of, if I send him to X university, will he do my bidding? So in this ecosystem, who wants to enter? Who wants to do Mathapachi? People who do it, and it is not that Indians are incapable of this. So we have two centers, we have two islands of excellence, as I call it, which are now getting affected by all the nonsense also, because how long can you stand out? But throughout 70 years, I think they have really, really justified the kind of work they've done and the expenditure they've done, and there are particular factors for it which are replicable. One is ISRO and one is the Department of Atomic Energy. These two have performed for the money they've been given. So it is not that Indians are incapable of this. It is that to untangle this system of vested interest that is, by the way, continuing from pre-independence era. Their genealogy stretched to pre-independence era. These are not new factors. Untangling this will be critical in both fixing what kind of education we have in our scientific complexes, as well as the output from those scientific complexes.
So is this happening just at BARC or any of the scientific institutions?
No, BARC is still relatively outside of the the bounds
and DRDO?
Of the theater of nonsense. See, DRDO is a very strange beast because practically every lab sits on a different pedestal.
I see.
So NAL, relative for the funds they've been given, is doing great. Our missile labs are doing relatively great, but then you've got labs which frankly we don't even know why they exist. And CSIR and ICAR, they take the price for wastage of money hands down. They open labs just to accommodate people who cannot be put by gatekeepers anywhere else.
Oh, okay. Now the problem you are pointing out.
I'll give you just one example.
Yes.
Right. We've got this lab in Uttar Pradesh, this ICR lab in Uttar Pradesh that is supposed to make medicines, right? I'm not naming it as such because anyone can figure it out. That lab, if I take a look at how many patents have actually been commercialized in its history of existence, the measly number comes out to be 12, and none of these medicines are so critical that cannot be made by someone else. What is happening? Why does this huge lab exist? Why are funds being given? Why are salaries being disbursed when they're supposed to make medicines and I can't even get the basic mandate fulfilled? Yeah, that's it.
Now, in my memory documentary, Deepta Sudha it's in Bengali. Deepta Sudha also was pointing out that we have that Pidhan Chandra Krishi Vidyalaya in Bengal, which hasn't been able to produce a seed that would be helpful to Bengal's farmers. We have to buy seeds from elsewhere, etc. They have not been able to provide anything for the masses of Bengal. Now, the specific, it's sort of a office politics problem, office framework, systemic problem. And I understand now that it can't go away with replacing the incentive structures even, then how do you, then you have to completely rebuild the entire structure of and the hierarchies inside the offices, right?
Not just inside the offices. So the rot is both at the bottom and the top now.
Great.
When a system when a system is in operation for too long, it reproduces itself over time. Institutions reproduce themselves over time. So now, if I think of it that way, what has happened is even the people who are entering, they get molded by the system very fast to operate in a certain way and have certain priorities. Otherwise, it's very difficult it is not that there are no genuine scientists or no genuine technologists or researchers, but their life is living hell. If you actually take a look at things like alcoholism or broken families or severe outcomes like that in our scientific class, you will actually be surprised to the extent to which people are unhappy. And beyond that, let us also not forget that 600 plus Indian scientists have been killed in mysterious circumstances over the years because these are all critical national assets, especially our nuclear scientists and scientists that are involved in, let's say, the BrahMos program and so on. So now, if I take a look, when you're discussing what can be done, this book essentially gives a time-bound framework for what can be done in 1, 3, 5 years. And some of it's some credit to the government, some of it's
the Fixing Science book.
Correct. Some of its recommendations have indeed been taken up by the government. For example, some of its inputs made it to that nuclear bill, Shanti bill, that liberalized the nuclear sector. So now, overall, the problem is this. As long as you have the hold of the gatekeepers, the incentive structure is basically written in stone. Right? If I get rid of the top level gatekeepers. The middle level ones will want to fill that vacuum. They will not wither away. And hence, what is far more important or necessary is that you realize how these gatekeepers actually operate and structure incentives within the system. One such way was awards. The second thing was discretion and grants. The third thing is what? Sending someone abroad for research projects. It's basically pick. ऐसा कोई instrument as such, there are very few things, but more or less there are no such instruments that today only foreigners have and you have to go all the way over there. And let us also understand one very critical thing. The Department of Science and Technology in this country is headed by a scientist and not a bureaucrat. So the problem is not just the bureaucracy. The problem is definitely the scientists. They cannot be let off the hook. And these gatekeepers are all scientists, at least in name.
Yeah, in liberal arts, we
is-
know that
Yeah.
how much gatekeeping there is and how much coterie and favoritism there is in just the liberal arts and social sciences. So I'm surprised to find that it's there in the sciences as well.
Correct. So 80% of the problem, if I can summarize how to fix it, is that you have to tell the scientist very early on that if you switch to science administration, you will no longer be involved in active science. India is the only country on the planet where every scientist wants to be an administrator, and the moment they're made administrators, they also want to do science. There will be what that leads to is severe conflicts of interest that cannot be resolved in any meaningful manner. And the reason why they all want to do this administration, so the way I've written it, I viewed it that more or less these gatekeepers, they're functionally a jati. And what happens is that scientific person who's entering the system, he sees these gatekeepers, and all of these gatekeepers are basically in the administration, hobnobbing with the administration, hobnobbing with ministers and secretaries and this and that. That kind of affinity and affiliation leads to a desire for Jati Prakash. Jati Prakash is when one Jati wants to shift to another Varna. So now what happens is there are psychological and financial incentives that are structured for every scientist to desire becoming an administrator so that he can also dispense rewards, build networks.
It's a status jump.
Not
it's a
just
status jump as well, sir.
Status to hey, it's also money, because it's also students. Because what happens is, if my students, my affiliates, my allied fellows, they are placed across critical chairs in different universities. मेरे को वहां से भी प्रोजेक्ट मिलेगा, मेरे को यहाँ से भी साइटेशन मिलेगा, मेरे को वहां भी एक्सेस मिलेगा, वहां पे जब ऑडिटोरियम में बढ़िया सा कोई प्रोग्राम होगा, वो तले हुए समोसे मिलेंगे 2 दिन पुराने, मेरे को भी खाने को मिलेगा. So all these incentives then start clouding the scientific architecture. तो तुम्हें क्या करना है? Like America. In America, it is not that science administrators are born or they're selected from the bureaucratic pool. They are also scientists. But they're selected early on in their career, 3 to 5 years, once they understand how the system works. And they're told very clearly, you're never going back to active science ever again. If you break this Gordian knot between science administrators and scientists, a lot of your problems can be solved in the short and medium term.
I've heard Dr. Fauci is a very significant doctor himself, or a significant scientist himself. Then how did he do the science if he was an administrator early on in his life?
Again, so the broad structure which I think works is how, let's say, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory works in the US, or how the system where, and here is where education becomes important. In America, what happens is all of these labs are embedded in universities. They might be, governed by a body such as NASA or the departments, their respective departments, but they're embedded in universities. They draw from.
They're all university laboratories. Yes.
Correct. They all draw from the resources of the universities. The funding, overall direction, and the national priorities come from the top. We in India chose to go for a Frankenstein model, where a little bit of Soviet, little bit of English, little bit of German, and little bit of American we did. In that little, nothing happened. So firstly, we made sure that the science to come back to your question, how did Dr. Fauci do it? Dr. Fauci is a severe aberration. If I take a look at the last 50 years prior to Dr. Fauci, how many such names even come to mind? And it is also because under the Biden administration, the politicization of both the military and the scientific apparatus took place, and Trump is only intensifying that even further, which is deleterious overall for American science. That I have no doubts in saying. Unfortunately, they're Indianizing their science, and that won't lead to very good outcomes. In India, firstly, you divorced S&T from your universities, and there are political reasons for that. We can go into detail if you want after this, after we've addressed this question. But and secondly, what we did is two kinds of people, science administration and scientists, we chose to keep them combined. And administration is a very different skill from science. There is no reason to consider why a good scientist might be a good science administrator and vice versa. So broadly speaking, if I think of what are the two biggest problems in India in this respect, firstly, that we divorced our S&T complex from the university ecosystem, which destroyed both the universities as well as the S&T ecosystem. And secondly, we chose to keep combined the scientific administration cadre with scientists.
Now, how does this world affect us in our logistics warfare as well?
So now what happens is, if tomorrow I think about, let's take a country in history which was devastated, kuch bacha nahi, Japan. Post World War II Japan, all of their heavy capital machinery was more or less devastated. The only thing going for them was one thing: their savings rate was still high. Right? It really begs the question as to how was it that for a solid 20 years, Japan gave massive competition to America on the semiconductor front. So much so that at one point, the DRAM chips that were being made, Japan was ahead of America, and America was dead scared. They had to use all Samdam Dandabhed to bring them down. How did that come to happen? That came to happen because what Japan did after World War II was a very strict, severe, Spartan, at the same time very purposeful structuring of both its S&T education as well as its S&T complex. For example, if I stick to semiconductors, it basically threatened every single major Japanese conglomerate to join the semiconductor effort. And then what they did is they said all your IP will be pooled. And all of you, to make sure you're not competing, Nikon and Olympus will only work on lenses. Someone will only work on one section of the semiconductor supply chain. Other will work on the other semiconductor supply chain section. And this was coordinated by MITI, which is their Ministry of Trade at that point. Can you pull that off today if the semiconductor mission is going on in India outside of, let's say, the Indian Institute of Science? That kind of broad ecosystem simply cannot be built at that pace. Yes, you will be able to invite investments. Yes, you will be able to convince a lot of foreigners to set up plants, which they are doing with Indian partners. But to sustain all of that, do you realize the kind of scientific talent that is necessary? India में design talent बहुत अच्छा है, and वो इसीलिए है because you do not need access to heavy machinery and so on. It is an adaptation of the Indian mind to constraints that were artificially placed on it. So semiconductor design, most of it actually happens by Indians or in India, even for highly specialized applications like telecommunications. But if I want to build the entire ecosystem, I need specialists in water purity, because the kind of water purity necessary for a semiconductor plant is insane. Similarly, I need people who are masters when it comes to power supply and engineering. And the thing is, to integrate all of that, you need people with sane minds in both the ministries, which are being drawn, and the talent is drawn from the universities, that talent is drawn from centers, that talent is drawn from industry. You need that integrator kind of approach. We simply do not have the talent to back it up. This is a severe constraint on our pace. So tomorrow, and now the thing is, as America withdraws from the world, and it becomes more and more interested in hardcore mercantilism rather than maintaining, public infrastructure, shared public infrastructure. It will target your industries, and it is already doing so. So, for example, America says that we abuse trade barriers, we abuse, trade limitations. They do it 10 times worse. They specifically target sectors that we might be competing in. For example, the production of fluoride chemicals. They practically try to wipe out the industry in India. Production in melanin, something like 600% tariff they put on it. Reliance entered into a joint venture with some Russian entity to create synthetic rubbers. They tried to wipe it out. How will you survive in this world if you don't have the very basis for that S&T infrastructure that can help you even fight in this war?
Yeah. Would you take Rishabh's question here? Wouldn't this kind of super specialization create a barrier to vertical integration and/or economies of scale?
So again, if I think about modern technological feats, let's take an example. Let's take a look at the machines that actually do the lithography for semiconductor. Lithography is basically etching, the chip into being. You've got a wafer, which is flat semiconductor, which is also difficult to make. After that, you need to actually etch those semiconductor designs in layers, right? So the machines that are used, they are more or less made only by one company. 70% of all machines are made by that one company called ASML. Now, ASML is actually not, if I think of it functionally, it's basically a collection of super specialized entities. So one of their labs or one of their subsidiaries can easily be the only global supplier for that one particular component that goes into that big technology. So if I'm saying this kind of machines, that etching machine, it is not something that you can fit in a room. It takes multiple Boeing 747s to transport one of them.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, so these are gigantic machines.
Huge machines, and they have more components than we can imagine. And sometimes
I see.
globally, only one entity can make that component. So ASML, what does it do? If there is any problem in that company, if let's say production is getting hit or there's some management tussle, they will literally just throw cash and acquire it. They cannot afford to let that company goof off. So modern technology, whether we like it or not, so this goes for electric vehicles as well. आपका बैटरी का केमिकल कहीं से आ रहा है, उसके टर्मिनल्स कोई और बना रहा है, उसकी फिटमेंट कोई और कर रहा है, उसके इलेक्ट्रॉनिक कंट्रोल्स कोई और बना रहा है, सॉफ्टवेयर कोई और बना रहा है. Super specialization is simply a feature of life today, whether we realize it or not. Integrating it and having supply chain power, which is pricing power, is what these big companies do. So Apple is an integrator, Microsoft is an integrator, and Airbus is an integrator. HL is an integrator. आपको पता है तेजस प्रोग्राम में कितने कंपोनेंट्स बाहर से बन के आते हैं? आपकी सप्लाई चेन में 1200 प्रोड्यूसर्स हैं एक तेजस के लिए. So it is simply a feature of life, and the winners in the supply chain war will be the one who can understand where is the space in the global supply chain where I have an opportunity and capture that supply chain power and then expand into other things, which is sort of what we did in electronics. So it's not impossible. It's not like Indians are incapable of doing it. We entered into some very low quality assembly things like chargers. But now we are increasingly moving into PCBs. We're moving into
Yes.
higher up components. We're able to turn it into a profitable industry that can give a lot of people a lot of jobs, including S&T talent. So this is the model. Ultimately, hyper specialization will only increase over time. Managing it as the job of the integrator is one of the toughest and the most important things that any supply chain strategy has to involve itself in. And this is why you need that talent. आपको पता कैसे होगा कि इतना सब कुछ जा रहा है एक बड़े सिस्टम में अगर आपके पास S&T talent है. If you did not build that S&T talent over, if you did not educate them, involve in your institutions, if you did not embed your labs in universities, quick fixes like building centers of excellence is no solution.
Right. Is Rishabh's question here important? Is the market an issue?
Market is the issue. Market
Is
the
the market
issue.
there? Is it not being there an issue right now?
See, the challenge is this. Let me explain it in the simplest of terms. So you and me both are by and large proponents of the free market, correct? We believe that over time, in the long run, free markets are the most optimal solution to most things. But the free markets themselves have no intrinsic answer to someone who might be using aggressive state subsidies to build scale so that he can undercut your costs, right? So, for example, if tomorrow I say कि मेरे को methanol बनाना है और मेरे को acetic acid बनाना, both of these are critical precursors to practically any chemical industry. I cannot beat China at scale until billions and billions of dollars are subsidized to achieve that scale. So, if you have to be competitive in the market, your ability to integrate and incubate supply chains and select which ones need subsidy for how long based on how metrics is absolutely critical, and we have pulled it off with electronics. Someone could easily say China ko chhod ke Vietnam, so many countries are doing electronics. What need is there? India does not have a market. We identified some very critical and small spots, and we started with those small spots.
Okay.
And we did it in very adverse conditions because Nokia had exited following those patch demands in Tamil Nadu. That had destroyed our ecosystem that was being built. So bringing that back, identifying small positions in supply chains, identifying where there is a gap that can be addressed, and whether we have the kind of money that is needed to build scale until we reach competitiveness, which is why this PLI scheme has been more or less somewhat of a success. In some sectors, it's been a resounding success. In some sectors, it did not work. But that is also because of scheme design. But overall, if I speak in broad terms, why has the PLI scheme in electronics succeeded? Why is it succeeding in semiconductors? Why is it succeeding in other critical fields? It is succeeding because we had most of the precursors available to at least start the industry at a somewhat competitive rate. But to build that scale needed some kind of investments that was simply not available based on the risk appetite of the private sector. Right? So now what happens is the state steps in, it says that fine, I will bridge that risk gap. I will bridge that risk capital gap, provided that unlike in the past, where subsidies come simply because you exist, now you have to produce. That subsidy will be linked to your ability to produce and sell. तो तुम सेल करो competitive price पे, loss करो, मैं तुम्हें पैसे दूँ.
Okay.
And this is critical because this is somewhat similar to what China did. China has built overcapacity in practically every important field this way. And this overcapacity can be used as a weapon, because then what happens is you can absolutely dump things in the global market, suppress prices long enough for competitors to die out.
Deekhit, how do you rate the risk appetite of our private companies, the biggest ones even?
Very poor.
Why is it that way? Because of no government subsidies?
No, that is because the traditional way of making money in India is through what, in very Bhadra Bhasha can be called regulatory arbitrage. And if we are, not prone to niceties, it basically means whether, we can negotiate with the bureaucracy and the politicians and grease enough palms to make money based on regulatory barriers to trade rather than market barriers to trade. So the entire IT ecosystem, for example, in India was born simply because the regulators and the bureaucrats were not interested enough to constrain it.
That's how Bollywood has survived all this while. That's why Bollywood keeps doing good stuff.
But what happened then is that once it grows beyond the size, the regulator comes, the bureaucrat comes, approvals come, procedures come, and then these incumbents realize that I can actually make sure that there are regulatory barriers to entry rather than any market-based barriers to entry. And then they become Lala firms. So this cronyism is at the root of poor private risk appetite, because why will you put risk capital when you can do this?
And this can be solved without massive bureaucratic reform. Is there any way to do this other than Doge stuff? How do you alter behavior?
Again, behavior basically follows the money trail. It basically follows incentives. Human behavior is surprisingly plastic, right? Because the same country that is facing so much trouble in doing X, Y, and Z is the same country that is also flying to Mars. Is the same country which is also making weapons, comprehensive, complicated weapon systems at a globally competitive price. So, for example, Bharat Forge's 40% of overall defense sales are exports. We have a globally competitive defense giant in India today. How many people know that? So, but why did this happen? Because you've got one madman named Baba Kalyani, and he's hellbent that he will do it this way. But incentives can be structured in a certain way, and everything else follows. And that incentive basically is deeply rooted, because the politician makes money using this regulatory arbitrage, the bureaucrat makes money using this regulatory arbitrage, the industrialist makes money using this regulatory arbitrage. So, you know, you're stuck in a quandary. Only someone who has that kind of political capital, will, and intent to disentangle all of this, only he can deal with it, and he will deal with it. If it is ever dealt with, there will be political consequences. So, is there political risk appetite for taking that? That is the big question, and it can be done. Chandrababu Naidu did make Hyderabad in that era. It can be done, but you need that kind of leadership.
Deekhit, at the D3 event in Lucknow, the DRDO president, Dr. Sudhir Kumar Mishra, was saying that he expects about $3 to $4 billion in investment in Lucknow alone because of the missiles they are manufacturing in Lucknow. So what is DRDO doing right, and why? Whose vision is leading to this that's lacking in other departments and other fields in the country?
So even in DRDO, to pull it back, what happened is the PMO was absolutely sick and tired of DRDO's underperformance. A review was held. A committee was constituted under K. Vijayaraghavan, who was then our principal scientific advisor. And the K. Vijayaraghavan report was never implemented because of resistance from within the DRDO. At that juncture, what happened is the PMO decided that it will basically select the critical labs which are already performing relatively okay and which are important to critical defense systems. What are these critical defense systems? These would be missiles. India has been traditionally good at making missiles, so we need better missiles. Similarly, within missiles, what is there? Land delivery platforms. We did not have a Tomahawk class missile system. We now are testing one. It's close to becoming final. We needed drones. We've done well in drones. We needed people in optics. We're doing well in optics. We needed people in let's say air-to-air missile systems. Why? Because we're lagging both China and Pakistan when it comes to range. And then ADA, which is the aeronautical development. Now, the PMO basically took over the supervision of these specific labs. And what happens naturally is, if you take a look at both the Department of Atomic Energy and you take a look at the ISRO, both are placed under the PMO. So what Indians usually think is, if something has political attention, it will become bad. In science and technology, at least, the exact opposite happens. If the politician takes an interest, if the executive takes an interest in particular S&T goals and the institutions that are involved in goals, outcomes occur, because then accountability starts and the gatekeepers can't get away with blue murder. What happens is, these gatekeepers are the ones who are also formulating what needs to be done, who are also reviewing whether it has been done or not. It is like the same person signing his own leave from office. If you cut that when there is proper political attention, wonders can occur. And this is why certain labs of the DRDO are doing very good. But if I take a look at other labs.
So, Deekhit, this the description you are giving makes it sound very much of a decentralized system. Then you see, it's the repeated pattern of India that we get affected by this in Indian politics, and BJP is largely a representation of it as well. that we do not get the benefits of a centralized system, nor do we get the benefits of a fully decentralized system. We get the worst of all worlds. So if this is just decentralized and decentralization is not working, which means the incentive structures are screwed up, then is this the cost we pay for the evils that can come of centralization?
See, definitely. So let's take a look at history, right? Let's take a look at how did these institutions form themselves. So if you take a look at, let's say, the American system, you've got, amazing labs like JPAL, you've got the nuclear ignition facility. You've got labs which are not just of global repute, but even, let's say, small students would be aware of, because that's where so many historically great things have happened. Alamo, for example. All of these institutions, are again embedded in universities. There is a level of decentralization, but there is one critical aspect, that is accountability to political leaders. Ultimately, you have to tell the Prime Minister that last budget, the money you took, what have you delivered? You need to tell timelines. You need to give outcomes, and if those outcomes don't come, that politician is least bothered about the physics or chemistry you do. And he's least bothered about what kind of postdocs are you sending your students off to. He needs outcomes. Usko election speech mein bolna hai, maine ye missile banwaya. Right? In India, what happened is, around the time of independence, two critical factors happened. Firstly, Mudaliar in Tamil Nadu. So if you take a look at around independence, we actually had world-class labs in select universities, and these are not the universities that you will think when the word excellence comes to mind. Calcutta was globally rated. Patna had amazing labs. Allahabad had amazing labs. Madras had amazing labs. World-class work was being done. And these four universities, if these factors were not at play, today could give takkar to a good tier 2 or even tier 1 Chinese university. But what happened is, firstly, Mudalia down south, he basically said that the reservation question in Indian universities, especially Madras University, he will not budge on that. He said that they're absolutely 100%, 1000%, I do want reservations of this particular kind. Secondly, in Allahabad, in Patna, and so on, Congress leaders that were not aligned with the then Prime Minister had a strong support base. So what happened was, the Prime Minister abandoned the state universities and started setting up these centralized institutes. Funding to these universities was more or less cut off over the next 10 odd years. Their labs atrophied. The world-class talent which we had built up went off. Whatever physical infrastructure we had crumbled. And these centralized institutions were instead positioned at the forefront of scientific progress. To manage these centralized institutions, different kinds of umbrella bodies were set up, like ICSR, like ICAI, like what became ultimately the IITs and so on. Some regional institutions were simply converted, so just the management changed. Some regional engineering college became an NIT, for example. And now what happened was, in these centralized institutions, because we were a poor country, and this is not to blame the government, but it is simply to illustrate how incentives are built over time. You're a poor country, so what do? You basically select a field, and whatever critical high performance equipment you need, you put it in one place. So for example, Kanpur, which was set up by the Americans, very few people
and scale that up.
Yeah, and you just dump all the critical computing equipment you can get in Kanpur. You dump all the critical mathematical talent you have in Madras, and so on and so forth. But what this means is, ultimately, this is the root of the gatekeeper system. Because now, one fellow, who in all likelihood is simply a doctorate or a postdoc who in the US or in Europe, who's returned. Why? Because at that time, we were so desperate. We said that the moment you join, we will give you a promotion. Your designation will go up a notch. So you please join these institutes. These institutes were unknown, middle of nowhere things there. So now these boys, who would be slightly older than us, not more, they had one point access to all these critical equipments, and they started doing things like, I will only give someone else access to this equipment if I become a co-author in their papers. I will only give access to this equipment if tomorrow you said that 3 of your students, they will be sent off to America, because in America some higher hand is sitting there. So many of our IITs ultimately became centers for brain drain, systematized centers for brain drain. And these gatekeepers, without doing anything, they racked up citations, because whoever needed to do that kind of research only had one place in the entire country, and that one place in the entire country had its keys only with one person. These are the gatekeepers. Their students replicated the model, and then again and again and again.
Now,
So these-
Deekhit, my next question. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. No, please go on.
My next question will be about then who do we blame for the situation today, or who even can be approached by about fixing these problems? Is it the education minister, or is it somebody else, and what kind of vision is required? Just before we get into that, see if you can take Rishabh's questions here. Then should government incentivize creating large private sector corporates to be the integrators for A&T and R&T in India, in India, instead of doing through government departments? That would also streamline the research to engineering to economic viability, S&T for deep research.
So we are actually trying to do that. For example, when it came to AMCA, AMCA is our 5th generation fighter program. In AMCA, they did not select HAL as the integrator. They basically held a contest between different conglomerates, and they wanted to be a conglomerate led by the private sector. So this is actually the meaty model, that Japanese model, or even to some degree the Chinese model that we are trying to replicate. There are, however, limitations to this. The limitation being, you have to figure out sector by sector, subsector by subsector, component by component, what exactly is the risk-taking ability of the private sector and what the government needs to do to bridge it. So this is a constant work in progress. And one very beautiful thing that has happened in the past is that the centrality of the departments and the centrality of PSUs has indeed been going down, both in civil as well as military S&T applications. And this is the only way to go, because once these industries reach a certain level of competitiveness globally, then they will actually have an incentive to invest in R&D and do that thing on their own and build market relevant technologies. So we are basically grooming our industry to become what South Korea's chaebols have become, or Japan's family-led firms have become. And that will mean, by the way, for anyone, that will mean increasing inequality. There is no alternative to this.
Some more good questions from Rishabh. The US and EU bureaucracies are also very corrupt. How did their countries tackle this?
Again, political attention to outcomes. When the politician is invested in the outcome, he demands accountability in terms of what is being put on the table. So, it does. America of late has basically become, let's just throw as much cash as possible to fix the problem. We saw this during their F-35 program. However, at its very heart, nonetheless, the politicians are deeply invested in the success of their programs, because they are able to sell it to the public as victories for American S&T and military and commerce and American pride. They have linked their economic performance to their idea of national pride, which is only happening now in India. So ultimately, if you're in a democracy, rather than complaining we're in a democracy, we can't do this, we can't do that, leverage democracy to build things rather than just trying to move against it.
Yeah, that's what people who are stuck with the feasibility argument seem to forget, that some things are feasible because the people want it, some things are not feasible because people don't want it. So how about changing the minds of the people? It can be done if you incentivize things in a way. People can just be motivated about it. You probably disagree with this idea, right? That the government needs to invest at least 3% of GDP in research, at least 2 lakh crore. The claim that this will change things directly, you don't believe that, right? Just the money won't help.
See, in World War II, when they used to liberate these concentration camps, right? They did not give food immediately to people who were starving, because if you give them food at that point, they will die. once the body has atrophied so much, it cannot handle that kind of blood sugar rush. Similar to that, until and unless you don't fix the incentive structures that will be allocating and using this money, there is no point giving them extra money. They will
It will
only
become a
waste it.
bottomless pit for public funds.
It will become a bottomless. Peter Pan projects will simply proliferate.
Yeah. His next question is, how can government avail outcomes of basic foundational research in science like Riemann hypothesis, Euler
Riemann
problems, string theory, quantum physics, mechanics, astrophysics like black hole, or even pure math stuff?
It can't. So as a matter of fact, every country needs to prioritize, and especially a country like India, which does not have infinite cash. So now what needs to be done is, I have described this as the innovation supply chain. Right? What is the innovation supply chain? It begins at education, ends at fully commercialized products in the market. Each country needs to progress through certain stretches where it is particularly weak. And usually it is easier to start in the middle rather than any of the ends. Theoretical physics or theoretical, S&T might be important on a very, very long-term basis, but it is not a wise allocation to make if you've got stage 2 or stage 3 of the supply chain, where technologies can be quickly absorbed, adapted, and then we can move to commercialization to generate the cash that is needed to fund basic foundational research. So one of my proposals actually is, you need to cut back severely on basic foundational research, and you need to reorient yourself to far more technical research that falls in what I call stage 2 and stage 3 of the innovation supply chain.
By the way, Deekhit, that's kind of how Yogi is going about it with the forensic science lab here, state of the art. People were actually telling him that people had suggested to him, meaning the bureaucrats and stuff, that, oh my God, sir, how will we create this state of the art facility? We will need experts. We will need to create experts. He said, please forget experts for now. Just create certificate courses, create technicians. Let's fill up the entire campus with technicians, and they will become experts themselves. Then we can have them, because nobody else is going to come right now to help us.
It's also the changing nature of industry. Once we say, one good thing that has happened after so much effort is that the share of manufacturing in our GDP is indeed slowly going up. I was very pleasantly surprised to note this. But what people don't understand is, if the share of manufacturing in GDP is going up, the kind of jobs that will be preferred by the market also changes. You will need more technicians, you will need more hands-on people, you will need more plumbers, you will need more world-class electricians, you will need more people who do this kind of things, rather than someone who comes from a very, very high degree background. And today in many of our urban centers, an AC repairman, a plumber, a proper electrician can easily earn far more than a working professional who's basing his economic existence off a degree.
Yeah. Do you see
when manufacturing goes up, the structure of the job market changes drastically.
Do you see private sector reservation at all possible in the next 20 years? Do you think it will happen?
Look, if they do it, we're done for. Then there's no point.
Yeah.
And my hunch is that indeed, they might try in a few states, perhaps in a very limited way. Like Haryana tried that 10% of jobs have to go to Haryana. So it wasn't caste-based, but it was like a regional thing.
Yeah.
However, if you try to do anything so stupid, I think even the politicians ultimately understand that industry money which they get for their electoral funding will dry up.
The worst case scenario is then politicians like Trinamulis come to power whose black money is lesser than people's white money in other states.
Correct. So there are actually political incentives against it, which draw from the nature of political funding in this country.
Okay. One last question from Rishabh, then we move on to the vision topic. Can private universities with private capital create a parallel ecosystem where this gatekeeping can be challenged, at least in S&T, like BITS Pilani?
As a matter of fact, I base my hopes fully off of private universities only in this country. They have been more or less a joke till now. I'm fully cognizant of that. At the same time, if you want proper industry-led research, if you want jobs that are relevant to the job market rather than just meaningless degrees, and if you want to create ecosystems where genuine innovation can take place, private universities are the only hope, which is precisely what US has done, Israel has done, and even China. Their top of the line universities are more or less fully autonomous. They make their own money. Tsinghua makes its own money. So I hope, and I genuinely hope that the next wave of deregulation and the next wave of incentivizing these kinds of things happens in private universities. For example, actually, very few people will know, DRDO has been investing heavily in embedded centers of excellence in private universities, and they have led to some very surprising results. So there is this Graphic Era University in Dehradun. I'm not affiliated in any way, nor do I have any economic interest related to it. They are actually at the forefront of making radar invisible materials and related IP, because there's a DRDO embedded lab there. No one has even heard of this new university outside of people in that specific field, but wonders are happening. And similarly, two universities with which I'm loosely affiliated with, that is Rishi Hood, that is UPES. They are doing amazing work in their own small ways. UPS, for example, it gets funds from the department. It has a great incubator. They've been trying to set up science specific startups, and it's giving results. So yeah, I hope, my hope is actually fully off of these private universities, and IITs have to reorient themselves. Firstly, shut the humanities department in IITs. I have no reason why that poison has been introduced in those places. IIT Gandhinagar, IIT Kanpur, IIT Delhi, IIT Bombay, every place, day after day, you hear of all the nonsense that's been going on in the humanities departments. Please shut it and reorient the IITs into doing purely stage 2 innovation supply chain things, which is technical work. It's an Indian Institute of Technology, not science. Basic science have to go to ICERs. We have dedicated institutes for that. IITs are only supposed to do technological work, invest heavily. And for example, IIT Madras, the director of IIT Madras is actually the only non-army fellow which sits at the highest level of the National Security Advisory Council. Why? Because IIT Madras is doing some very amazing research sitting in there in aerospace, in optics, and electronics. A lot of the IIT Madras's technology was actually deployed on the ground when Operation Sindoor happened. They are the ones which are working on ramjet shells, so on and so forth. So IITs also within the public sector have to be aggressively reoriented towards doing only technological work. They have to rediscover their mandate, go back to the roots. And above all, that basic talent that comes, that basic raw talent that comes, it has to come from the universities. So IITs perhaps should even abandon their bachelor courses and focus only on specialized masters, which is a very controversial thing to say because the vast majority of IT students are bachelors. But if you're serious about technological progress, you have to emphasize MA and PhD level students, postdoc level students, rather than simply base it off of bachelors, which any university can handle. So a full reorientation of the education system. Until you don't do it, you will only do kaam chalao work.
Any way to prevent students from going to abroad, making them stay here? Firstly, I'm talking about both the carrot and the stick. Is there any way to force them to do research here because they studied for free? And is there any way to incentivize them that see, your life will be better here, meaning improve the quality of life here, municipality stuff, all of that?
Correct. So in China, for example, if they were sending you abroad, you went on a bond. You went on a bond saying that you will come back and you will work minimum X number of years in China. Now, when we made the IITs, it still baffles me as to why we did not have a bond. And perhaps the scientific gatekeepers who had a vested interest in sending people abroad had some kind of a thing to do in this regard. So here also, I am very clear, for example, in medical, in some states like Maharashtra, and I believe even in West Bengal, I'm not sure, please correct me if I'm wrong. If you're graduating in West Bengal from a medical college, you have to work minimum 2 or 3 years within rural Bengal or rural Maharashtra.
Yeah.
Right. So this idea is clearly there somewhere in the country. It's not alien to us. So yes, if you're studying from a public institution, especially an institution that's involved in technological research, then perhaps a bond system has to come. But at the same time, the carrot. Do we have enough industrial base to absorb these people? Someone with an IIT bachelor's earning 30,000 a month is not good. And that happens. That's a reality. Someone who's doing mechanical, someone who's doing civil, he's genuinely scared of what his job prospects are. And you can't argue that India has far more of them than anyone else. So if I think about it in this perspective term, you cannot expect PSUs to absorb them. Sorry. So perhaps you have to structure things in a way where, if they do join startups that are involved in particular things, you give them a nominal stipend at least.
I see.
That might be a way. Again, it will depend a lot on the sector, and how you weed out people who are trying to game the system will be a perpetual work in progress. But it has to be done. Any big thing you do will have some or the other wastage. Just because there will be wastage doesn't mean that you abandon the whole thing.
Right. Now, Deekhit, with such a gigantic systemic problem, and I'm sure you agree that it's a gigantic, it's not a small problem, right? Who's the guy to solve these things? Is Dharmendra Pradhan the source of all our troubles?
He's only inherited the system he's working in.
What can he do now? Does he have vision and he's not being able to execute it, or he doesn't have vision?
See, it's not just the education system, right? Firstly, the artificial distinction between education. I've completely forgotten to tell you. Can anyone explain why there is a department of science and technology and then there's a separate department for biotechnology? Who's coming up with these ideas and why are they not being turned over? Ye to minister kar sakte hain na? And since independence, I'm saying, regardless of who's in power, have we had a decent education minister or a decent S&T minister? Because till Narasimha Rao ji, the S&T minister was also the PM. He used to retain that portfolio. Now the PM has to handle 1,000 different things. So the question really becomes, is it a deficit of the public in connecting S&T to their future economic prospects? Is it that we do not understand the connection between, if we want good jobs in the future, we need better S&T? Because if that was the case, it would be a political point. It would be a political point for the politicians to talk about in public and actually demand accountability, which is what's happened in defense recently. Till recently, the idea that defense machines, big complicated defense machines are something that is important to the country and are a source of national pride did not as such exist. And especially because Bofors happened, it delayed the whole thing by 15 years. But once people said we can make a Tejas, or we can make the Kalvari, or we can have ATAGs of our own, or we can make drones of our own, political attention has come, risk appetite has gone up, investment has come, accountability has come. So perhaps instead of constantly looking at the ministers, we should demand that better education, better S&T are absolutely critical to me, my child, and his child's future. And hence, we force the politicians to make it a political point on which they converse. Education only now, higher education only now, because of the stellar performance that we've had from Mr. Pradhan, has resulted in, every house at least talking about it and demanding answers from politicians. Which is why at least the major national parties are indeed speaking about higher education. I can only expect good things to come from this, regardless of whether Mr. Pradhan is retained or not. But this political attention that this is something that is sensitive to the voters, until that doesn't come, I think it is completely futile to blame it on the politicians or even the bureaucrats.
And what's the awareness level of the bureaucrats and the biggest of ministers in the country, do you think, about these particular problems?
I'm not privy to the ministers or what goes on in their lives. But bureaucrats, I know it is a mix of good and bad. There are genuinely good bureaucrats out there who have actually in the past also changed the fate of the nation. The IT revolution would not have been possible without a set of bureaucrats who were committed to making it happen.
Yeah.
The PLS scheme would not have taken off if there wasn't a bureaucrat who went out of the line. Nor, let's say, this big, public insurance system that we have, the Pradhan Mantri Yojana for public insurance. I'm forgetting its name, sorry. That wouldn't have happened unless the bureaucrat took a line that, yes, giving money to the insurance industry might be something we should do. This is not stealing or this is not corruption. But at the same time, the incentive structures they work in are ultimately defined by what kind of political oversight they have. And that in this country flows from the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Now,
So yeah, please.
how much of a say does an education minister have in the center as well as in the states?
See, that varies widely across time and space. If you have a
Okay.
very strong Prime Minister, then there's no say.
Okay.
If you have a very strong Prime Minister who's committed to thinking only he is right, then your
Yeah.
say is zero. But if
Hmm.
you, let's say, have a Lee Kuan Yew like figure, which comes once a while, let's say if you have a Narasimha Rao type Prime Minister, which is willing to listen to the RBI governor, willing to listen to his finance secretary, willing to work things out and support them and invest political capital in them, wonders can happen. So somewhere I believe, which is also one of the recommendations I had made in the delimitation book, perhaps we should adopt a semi-presidential system. This mess is not working for us. This pitch of parliamentary and presidential is not working for us. Why
Yeah.
should see what is the qualification of a minister? That he won an election.
Hmm.
What does that have to do with the management of the portfolio he has been given?
The
So,
argument here would be, the counter argument here would be that ultimately that administration is going to be run by the babus. So the minister is there to direct the babu towards doing things for the people.
yeah, but here's the thing: the minister in today's times, when personality contests and centralization at the highest level is the norm globally,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
whenever there's chaos in the world, people will move towards slightly more centralized systems.
Yeah.
Right? So we are not an aberration. When globally that is the case, and we know that in India, what works is if the PM is looking at something, then only something works.
Yeah.
Then why are we working against the system? And so much so that the system is being run by babus, the minister will overlook at babus. Has any major reform of the bureaucracy ever been done in this country by any government? Who's running the babus? The babus are running themselves. They're running the minister. It's not the other way around. And they're able to run the minister because the minister's primary interest is not in administration but in politics. So the same problem that we have in our scientific administration, that a scientist also wants to be an administrator, also wants to be a scientist, is the same problem that we have in our ministries. A politician wants to be a politician as well as an administrator. You get a full-fledged administrator, you get a proper ex-babu, he will run the babu. Why has Shaktikanta Das delivered so beautifully in his RBI tenure? Because he is a babu.
Now, what does Dharmendra? So then this problem is not solvable in the next 1 or 2 years, right? By then, Dharmendra Pradhan is gone in the next cabinet shuffle, probably. What does the cabinet next education minister do then? Where does the so this is going to be solved only by nuts and bolts reforms inside the entire system, right? And the education minister must sit down with the industries minister.
So DPIIT, the Department for the Promotion of Internal Industry and Trade, that is one. Then the Minister of Science and Education, and especially the secretary that handles higher education, that is two. And thirdly, when it comes to the Science and Technology Ministry, ek to DBT, please just merge it. Let's not even do this. Merge it. ICAI ka chief, ICMI ka chief, ICSR ka chief. All of these people need to be put in the docket by the Prime Minister. The last 5 years, what have you done? There has to be accountability. Once there is an expectation of accountability, reforms will occur on their own. There was an expectation of accountability in defense production, it happened. And such severely difficult, dismantling the Ordnance Factory Board. No one has any idea how difficult of a decision that would have been for anyone. There are so many vested interests, so many vested interests, trade unions, trade militarism, foreign powers, you name it, and it was there in the OFB. Corruption within the army. Dismantling the OFB. If this government was capable of doing it, it definitely has the capability to pull off reforms like this. The question is, A, do they recognize that this is a necessity that will only come from the people, that won't come from any babu? And B, then will they have the will to carry on these reforms? This will also come only from the people. The nuts and bolts reforms that you and me are talking about, they will only come once there is appetite for this politically. that someone can capitalize on this politically. Otherwise, if I am, let's say I'm the PM, I avoided a great disaster. That is not sufficient for me to win an election. So Niall Ferguson actually talks about it in one of his books, that in democracies there is this perverse incentive that politicians might want disasters to happen and then they manage it properly so that they can say I
Yeah.
managed a disaster properly, rather
Yeah,
than
false
preventing a
flags are the
disaster.
order of the day.
Correct, because there's no PR that you can do by preventing a disaster.
Yeah.
It never happened. So
Yeah.
now in this case also, education, I can expect good things if the people continue their pressure. And we have been seeing this. 4-year degrees are being rolled out. That 3-year
Yeah.
abomination
Yes.
is going away.
Yeah.
We can see that in select places, industry has been included. There is some select work that's happening. Startup incubators are coming up in major places, and they're able to get their startups to private funding. So when private equity, venture capital starts putting money in these startups, that is when you know that quality is there, that the market has some acceptance for what we're doing. So things have been happening, but at the end of the day, if you want to push the Babu, you have to push the minister. If you want to push the minister, you have to push the PM. And if you have to push the PM, then the people have to push themselves.
Now, the conspiracy theory that people on the outside discuss, which might be true, I believe in it myself. It's not a conspiracy theory for me personally, but objectively speaking, it is a conspiracy theory and nothing more. That RSS wants the education ministry, and Dharmendra Pradhan is RSS's guy, and RSS does not have a vision regarding the education system of the country, other than bringing in IKS. What are your thoughts on this claim?
Again, I am not privy to how RSS thinks. I am also not privy to how the Prime Minister thinks. But broadly, what can be stated is, till now, you could pull off tricks like this because...
Sorry, just to interrupt, I'll just make a more precise question. Do you objectively have a problem with RSS taking the education ministry? Is it possible that even if a guy is from RSS, then even then he might have a great vision?
Of course, you've got people who are thorough technologists in RSS as well. RSS has, I mean, it's more or less, oblivious to what stance you have on certain technologies. They'll have Luddites also in their groups, which we've seen in some of their things. They also have high-end technologists in their groups, which we've also seen. So they seem to be completely,
they have people in all sorts of professions, but their high-level technologists are also Luddites when it comes to policy about the villages and stuff.
But that could also be because their risk-taking appetite is so low.
Yeah. Then do we bother about the issue of RSS taking the education ministry, quote unquote taking the education ministry?
See, I am only bothered with outcomes. How you end up with those outcomes, whether it is via RSS, whether it is via someone else, is frankly irrelevant to me. So someone with a vision, and by vision I don't just mean political speeches. Do they have a plan?
Of course. Yeah.
Do they have a plan, and can they convince the Prime Minister to invest enough political capital to pull this off? They pulled off the centralization of all medical exams during NEET. Correct? They pulled off this DUCUET and similar exam reorientations. They pulled off introducing the NT and finishing off, a lot of the state nonsense that went on. They've pulled off in bringing industry to major public sector institutions. They've pulled off so many things, so it's not a question of capability. It's a question of whether they can capitalize it in politically. That is it. So if that factor exists, if they know that politically it can be a talking point and a voting point, that fixing science in India is a political point on which someone's vote might be affected by, or fixing education in India, or making sure that our supply chains are globally resilient. Supply chains question is somewhat there. Because today that connection between jobs, economy, government is somewhat clear to even average people, common people. They somewhat understand that industry is necessary for jobs and industry needs to compete. That basic concept is there. So that is already there. But if these other, dots all over the innovation supply chain are also connected, then the right guy will find the seat. You won't have to find the right guy for this. It's the incentives over which people operate. People barely structure incentives.
Yeah. How could we have prevented the NEET fuck up?
Firstly, by understanding that this, half-willed digitization does not work. Only the some interface of it you've digitized, the rest is all paper and physical things. We've been holding fully digital exams for a very long time, which have not had a problem. We've also held fully physical exams over which we've not had a problem. This halfway house is always a problem, and in NEET and in big physical exams, once you depend on state government employees or employees affiliated with the state or employees in that vicinity, in that broad bracket, many of them have themselves paid money to enter that place. What do you think they will do? So if you want to go digital, do it properly. In NEET, for example, I know of instances where people in Haryana, they're setting up centers all the way in Meghalaya, and everything is nicely gamed. They make sure that their kids select that Meghalaya center in their preferences. Buses are organized from Haryana to take them all the way to Meghalaya, and digitally they do whatever has to be done. The IT fellow who comes to check on the thing is simply paid 50,000 and pulled off. Real life example of it. Don't do this halfway house. If you want to do it UPSC style fully physical, do it UPSC style fully physical. If you want to do it fully digital, make sure it's done properly. But once you have this interface between digital and physical, no, it goes for a complete toss.
Again, worst of all worlds.
For example, they've done this fiasco this time where the Air Force has to fly more than 200 sorties to deliver question papers. Is that what the Air Force was made to do? And why do you need to set a physical question paper even today? Why can't you have a bank of questions which 5 minutes before the exam randomly selects questions from that bank?
Yeah.
Is this not doable?
Because somebody will lose their jobs if this is done.
Somebody will lose their jobs. This is all just a scheme to make sure unemployable people are given money.
It's called developmental economics, Deekhit. We have no way outside that.
So,
a long-time leftist guest of ours, who's a detractor but does watch our arguments carefully, is saying, put V. Kamakoti in charge, he will do potent Gaumatra reforms.
right.
What do you have to say to that?
He's also someone who's responsible for a lot of optical seekers that went into the missiles that were used in Operation Sindoor. How much of it can he do?
Yeah. So to close the discussion, do you give us any hope? Can we close this on a hopeful note?
Why not? I'm absolutely hopeful. I'm 100% hopeful. Throughout this discussion, I've given you examples where this country has achieved what people think is impossible.
But I'm thinking that a lot of the reforms might come now because there's so much pressure on Dharmendra Pradhan and stuff. But since it's on Dharmendra Pradhan and therefore on BJP, doesn't that mean that the increasing of this pressure will ultimately lead to Rahul Gandhi becoming the PM?
Yeah, that is one huge leap of imagination here. But see, here's the thing. The pressure isn't on any minister. The pressure isn't on any party. The pressure is on the person jiski shakal dekh ke vote diya gaya tha. And that is precisely where we have to put the pressure. Once we put the pressure on him that we need jobs, will happen. Once we put the pressure on him that we need a uniform, medical examination system, need happen. You put the pressure on him, you will get an outcome.
Right, Deekhit, can you give us some talking points right now off the top of your head, so that our audience members who are frequent debaters in our online right-wing debating army on the social media, so that they can take up some of these points and counter people from the government on Twitter and Facebook and stuff? What do you want them to speak about?
It's very simple. It's very, very simple. You pick up copies of my book. I have given detailed statistics on the outcomes of each of these people, places, institutions. So where I'm saying, that what has that medical lab done? I've given you exactly the number of patents and where they have been commercialized. When I'm saying that, in India, fermentation chemistry, we were global leaders of fermentation chemistry and we all lost it out due to bureaucratic negligence and because Chinese acquisitions occurred, which we allowed. We allowed the Chinese to acquire our technologies and run away with it. So now
that was after the MOU signed between Congress and CCP, right?
It preceded it.
I see.
So now the thing is, now we have to pay billions and billions of dollars in incentives to pull back we were once global leaders of. Once you find these examples, then only you can hold them accountable as to what you're doing. If I ask CSIR, can you count 20 big achievements of CSIR in the past 20 years? Similarly, forget this. tell people to search about BGR34. They made an anti-diabetic drug that ended up increasing blood sugar, and the Prime Minister inaugurated it, and it was a huge ruckus. I mean, it's so on your face. You don't even need to think in terms of systems or anything. You just pick up any institution, and there's so many skeletons in the closet. The question is,
Right.
us, when we're debating, what will be the other side response? We are trying, we are doing, we have done. On all three of these counts, you can show them the numbers and say, where is this doing? Where is this trying? What have you done? So until and unless you don't say that we will not accept works in progress, we only want results, and you show us the results, they will be put in the dock.
Okay, that's as hopeful as we can get for now. Yeah, just a point is being made. We have too many naked bureaucrats too who are compromised to some foreign powers. They will push back against any reforms. This is probably true, right?
The lifeline of any bureaucrat is his pension. No one wants to lose his pension. That guy might be paid millions of dollars abroad. Usko phir bhi wahi pension chahiye. You threaten his pension, he will do whatever you want.
Hopefully, because if it comes to Trinamool people, a lot of them might have had made enough money that even pensions don't matter to them. Their MLA pensions, MP pensions, police pensions.
See, that is an extreme case. That is sweet.
Yeah, Trinamool itself, West Bengal is an aberration, and people are practically treating Trinamool like a glitch in the matrix. People just want to forget that they were ever part of Trinamool. Most of my attackers have wiped out their entire social media profiles. If you visit their profiles today, you won't even recognize that they were ever in Trinamool. They're just posting pictures of their tours and trips and quoting poems, etc. They have no remote connection with Trinamool. That's the vibe you'll get.
Oh my God.
Should we convert our regular colleges somewhat like ITI, where we only teach technical skills, because most students studying want jobs, but most of them lack skill to enter skilled working force?
100%. In Germany, for example, you got a 2-track education system, right? Where you're selected around what would be our 10th, 11th level. Either you enter, technical education, or you go to gymnasium where they have higher sciences and higher studies. It is the need of the day, and there is no shame or anything in it. You will be richer than that guy. Yaar. Pick up a skill that you're good at.
Yeah.
Work hard on it. And I would have been really gladdened had, instead of this content creation economy scheme in schools, they'd come up with things like this, where actual jobs can be made.
I'll give you a personal.
This again shows, lopsided popular attention to something can lead to absolutely adverse outcomes from the government. It's our fault as much as it is theirs.
Yeah, there is some dignity to labor issues as well, and some remnants of the caste-like thinking as well. I have a personal story to share in this context. A distant relative of mine who was really great at simply fixing machines and watches and clocks as a child. Somehow his knack was in those kinds of things. He made a potato clock. He took out a machine and made a different clock out of it. So even till this day, anything in our family breaks down, any speaker and stuff, we send it to that person and he fixes it. He's in his 40s now, and so the people who are good at studies or who have some know-how of the industry and stuff told him that you must absolutely get into ITI, because otherwise he was not very good in studies, and he comes from a lower middle class background, almost lower class, and he didn't get into ITIs. Simply because he had a girlfriend who he is married to now, did not want him to become a mechanic, and his best friend in the neighborhood went to that ITI, is probably the second best ranked Yamaha motorbike engineer in the entirety of Eastern India. And then he introduced me to him, so I used to service my bikes with him all the time, and then he used to get awards from Yamaha all the time, and he was the best. He used to work in the biggest Yamaha showrooms, all the flagship showrooms of Kolkata. Then the flagship showroom went away to Ankurhati instead of Keshtapur of Yamaha. He went to Keshtapur as well. He went to Ankurhati as well. Now that guy has just his own setup in his home in Kontai, which is near Digha, okay, in a random mofussil place. Even then he gets so much business from there, because all the long riders, distance riders go to Digha and stuff on their bikes and they break down. He just makes an insane killing making just from that job. And that relative of mine has been stuck in a 15,000 rupee bullshit office job for his life.
No,
because of the overall entire economy and stuff. He never progressed. His office didn't pay him his salaries and stuff.
This was what? This was an outcome of manufacturing not being a great enough share in the economy. That's changing. I have, for
Yeah.
example, recommended you take the ideas and you just give them over to industry. Let them decide the syllabus.
Right. Exactly
Let
what
them
Yogi
decide
is
the program.
trying to. Yeah.
Do it. Education as such probably needs fewer educators and more
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
I am absolutely in for it, and we have to scale back a lot of the theoretical education seats
Yeah.
we have and emphasize on this and work with industry. They are not getting the talent they need, and
Exactly.
we are not producing the talent they need.
Yeah. We have
And
unemployment as well as job vacancies at the same time.
correct. So who's the loser? The loser is the person in the job market.
Yeah.
So I hope you please anyone who's watching this. I think both of these books will do you very well. Get whichever one you prefer, because this will help you greatly in thinking about not just what's happening in the country and what needs to happen, but also some of you might get some very valuable advice on the kind of careers you want to lead. Please
Right.
don't just give in to media pressure or the kind of seats that are available in our education system. Go out there and take some risks.
Okay, then thanks a lot, Deekhit, for that very enlightening conversation. I learned a lot because this is not a world I follow at all. And I think our audience had a great time. Thanks, Deekhit. Let's do it sometime again. And
Yeah,
best of luck for more popularity of your ideas and Professor Desiraju's ideas.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deekhit. Bye-bye, guys. See you all soon. Good night.
কালো তোকে বলে সবাই, আমি দেখি আলো কালো তোকে। কালো তোকে বলে সবাই, আমি দেখি আলো কালো তোকে বলে সবাই, আমি দেখি আলো বিপদে মা তোকে ডাকে সবাই, আমি যেন তোকে রাখি ভালো। বিপদে মা তোকে ডাকে সবাই, আমি যেন তোকে রাখি ভালো। কালো তোকে বলে সবাই, আমি দেখি আলো। রূপে মা তুই জগৎ জননী, ভুবন মোহিনী বেশ মা তোর। রূপে মা তুই জগৎ জননী, ভুবন মোহিনী বেশ মা তোর। আধারে খুঁজেছে জ্ঞানহীনে, আধারে খুঁজেছে জ্ঞানহীনে, হৃদয়ে খোঁজেনি আলো মা তোর। আলো তোকে বলে সবাই, আমি দেখি আলো কালো তোকে বলে সবাই, আমি দেখি আলো বিপদে মা তোকে ডাকে সবাই, আমি যেন তোকে রাখি ভালো। কালো